Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of To Light the Lightning by Ada Palmer. This book was my Patreon book pick for the month. Every month my Patreon supporters get to vote in a poll of a book I will read and review, and this was the most recent pick. If you're interested in contributing to my channel in that way and voting in polls for some of my content, both on this channel and on my personal channel, then I will leave my Patreon on the screen. So To Light the Lightning is the first book in an adult science fiction series. It takes place in the near future, so it still takes place on Earth, but there is a lot more high-tech things going on, and the politics of the world are very much changed from how they are currently. This book is a recounting of a history of some events that you're not quite sure what their significance are, and it follows a number of different characters, but the protagonist really is the narrator of the story, and he's writing the story in the style of the Enlightenment period, which is a very particular kind of writing style. When the story takes off, there's an investigation going on around the rigging of this list of influential people, which is very important for this world, and we kind of go from there. But it's not really about that. It's about so much more than that, and the synopsis is very hard to do because I went into the story not knowing much about it, and you don't really find out what the story is about until you read the story. And that's true for any book, but that's the only way I can describe it being especially true for this book. Let's get into the review. So first off, we talk about the world building. In this world, Earth is a lot more interconnected than it used to be. There's a number of cars and different travel devices that make it so that you can get from one side of the world to the other in about an hour. So the importance of countries is no longer there. People's birth countries or their nationalities is just no longer a thing the way that it used to be. And so hives matter much more. Now, from what I gather of the story, because this is kind of a story in which you are dumped into the world, hives are kind of something that you choose based on your morals. So it's sort of like your Harry Potter house or whatever they call it in Divergent, and you sort of pick where you're going to go based on your morals. But there's a little bit more to it than that, but the intricacies just get slowly explained throughout the story. Then your birth family doesn't really matter so much as these like chosen found families that you have. So there are people that choose to live together in like communal living housing type things, and it's sort of like the taking a village to raise a family, and everyone's not necessarily blood related, and so these kinds of houses are what is common. That's kind of how family is defined in this world. Additionally, with this story, there's a major focus on philosophy and organized religion in a way that I wasn't quite expecting, so it is worth mentioning that organized religion in this world has been kind of banned. So there are people that are designated to come and talk to people about different religions and philosophical questions, but in a non-religious way, and that is a big factor in the book as well. Additionally, people do not use gendered pronouns anymore, so they use they for everybody. But in the writing style of the story, since he's using the Enlightenment period, he does use gendered pronouns, but also he doesn't use necessarily the gendered pronoun that matches the person's biological sex. Most times he doesn't, actually. So it's kind of confusing as a reader to be introduced to this person that's being described as he, and then you figure out that actually, because he will say he has this kind of bodily feature that you know is biologically female, so there's all of that going on. See how complex and layered this story is? This is a review that I was like, this is going to be kind of hard because there's so much going on with the story, and this is probably one of the longer world building sections I've ever done for a review because so much of what the world is affecting the plot and the characters. But let's get on to the characters. Actually, for this section that reminded me, there's a number of triggers in this book that don't quite pop up until later on in the story, but they are significant. So I would say there's triggers here for torture, rape, gore of any kind, and if you are at all squeamish about in-depth sexual acts, you might want to steer clear of this. So with these characters, all of these characters are very complex and raw and layered, and there's a lot of interesting political maneuvering that's happening that is interesting because of the political setting of this story. So there's a lot of political machinations, but in ways that you don't really know where it's going to quite go because you don't quite get the significance of all of this, and it's very slowly being unraveled to you. Like I mentioned earlier, you're sort of just dropped into this world and these characters, and you're not really told from the get-go what the significance of all of these things are until the story reveals it to you. It's slowly unraveled throughout the story up until like the final pages. Like there's constantly just like little tidbits being revealed to you. So there's a lot of political machinations going on with all of these different characters, but you're not not really sure of the significance of it until later on. So I will say with that, it's hard to follow the motivations of the characters, but in a good way, in a way that's kind of interesting. It's hard to follow the motivations or to really know who to like in this world, because you're like, I don't know if by these standards, like what makes a good person, what makes a bad person, like all of that. Because you're really forced by the book to kind of abide by the standards of the time period that it's written in. And you're like, I don't know who to pull for. Are you bad? Are you good? I don't know. For example, the protagonist slash main character, the main narrator of the story, about halfway to 3/4 of the way through the book, there's revealed some information about that character that makes him very polarizing and borderline unlikable. But at that point, you've already been with him for so long that you're like, am I supposed to like, you don't even know what the author wants from you. You're like, am I supposed to like him? Am I not? Who am I supposed to like? Who am I pulling for here? I don't really know, but it's in a good, interesting way. If you like these kinds of stories that make you think about it, then it's in a good way. So it's in a good way in my opinion, but some people aren't going to like that. So last thing to talk about the plot. Again, you're very just dumped into the plot, and for the longest time I was like, I'm enjoying this, and like it's interesting, it's kind of intriguing, but at the same time it's like, I don't really know what's going on. And there's a lot of distractions, so you don't find out until much later on in the story, like kind of what the main point is and what the big thing is. And the narrator even says like, all these other things are kind of red herrings, like the big thing is kind of this, but the characters aren't quite talking about that yet, because there's all these other things happening, and there's this like mystery story of like who rigged this list and the political machinations around that, but then there's a number of other side plots that are happening at the same time that kind of intersect with that, and the way that all the different characters kind of intersect with one another. So there's just a lot going on that your brain is constantly having to piece together. So it's kind of like one part mystery, one part theological crisis. So again, if you're not into like religious questions at all in your books, because I know some people are sensitive to that, you probably aren't going to like this, but I find that kind of thing super interesting in sci-fi and fantasy. So, and it's not necessarily like dominant Western religion that they're talking about either. So there's kind of this like theological crisis happening alongside this like mystery happening alongside this like political crisis, and all of it kind of weaves together. So it's definitely at times a slower story. There's also a lot of action, and it's very character focused because there are so many characters, and how they all weave in with one another is a major part of the story. This also, I believe, is a duology. So I have heard that and the second book's already out, so I've heard that they should really be read fairly close together, because it is a two-part story, and even at the end of this, it's like, this now ends part one of this history or whatever. So it really should be read as close to back as possible, apparently. So I'm hoping to get to that, but I don't currently own it, and I have goals related to not bringing on many books, so I'll talk about that in future videos. So yeah, with all that being said, I'm finding this very difficult to give a star rating to. I've on Goodreads said that this is a 4-star book, and I'm kind of leaving it at that and also talking to you about that. But there's so many things about this book, particularly with some of the like moral things that I mentioned, some of the things about the unlikable characters, some of the things about the triggers, all of that, just how it's written, that it's almost impossible to really give it a star rating, because breaking it down to a star rating is just too simple for a book that's this complex and layered, which also speaks to the fact of like how good it really is. But there's also parts about it that aren't very like necessarily enjoyable, but they're not really supposed to be. So this is a very interesting book to talk about. I definitely like recommend this for a buddy read potentially if you're interested in that, or something like that, because this book is just, it's not black and white. It's not simple. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of mess. And it's interesting, and up until the last few pages I still wasn't sure. I was like, am I gonna keep reading this series? Like, I don't know, and I think that I am, because now that I've had time to sit with it. But it's a book you have to sit with. It's a book that is unpredictable. It's just, yeah, it's a lot. I wasn't gonna do a discussion on this book, but I very deeply hope that I'm going to get to the next book in the series soon, especially because the author and then a lot of people have told me that these books should just be read as one kind of giant story. So I don't want to necessarily discuss the first book without having the context of the second book, because there's still so many things left unanswered. So if you have read this book and you want discussion from me, definitely hit me up on any of my social media, message me or whatever, because I'm definitely willing to go there. It's just at this point I don't want to discuss it without all the material that I feel like I need. See what I mean about like how kind of hard this book is in a lot of ways? Because yeah, it's definitely complex and definitely something that I feel like I will discover more about as I sit with it. So 4 out of 5 stars technically. it's too complex for that. So comment down below and let me know if you've read Too Light the Lightning and what you thought of it. Thank you all for watching. See all of you guys soon.